US President Donald Trump has barked at the European Union and Canada over their trade practices just as Western statesmen prepare for a sit-down at the G7 summit, a meeting which is expected to reveal the deep disagreements between the US and its traditional allies over trade. On Thursday, just as leaders of the other G7 countries, Britain, Canada, Germany, Italy, France and Japan, were headed to the annual summit to be held in Canada, President Trump tweeted that,
"Please tell Prime Minister Trudeau and President Macron that they were charging the US massive tariffs and create non-monetary barriers. The EU trade surplus with the US is $151 billion, and Canada keeps our farmers and others out. Look forward to seeing them tomorrow."
The US president then continued his Twitter tirade, calling Canada's Justin Trudeau indignant and accusing Ottawa of killing the US's agriculture. Mr. Trump's comments were not, however, made in a contextual vacuum. He was responding to earlier marks by Mr. Trudeau, as well as French President Emmanuel Macron. Particularly scathing were those made by Mr. Macron, who clearly wanted to make his differences with Trump known, saying that maybe the American president doesn't care about being isolated today, but we don't mind being six if needs be. Mr. Trudeau added to the tension by warning that there would be robust discussions over the recent imposition by Mr. Trump of large trade tariffs on steel and aluminium imports, which have angered many of the US's free trade promoting Western allies. While Canada and the EU are expected to try and convince Trump to reimpose waivers that gave them respite from the 25% steel and 10% aluminium tariffs, experts aren't so sure that they'll have much luck. Stavros Mavroudeas, a professor of political economy at the University of Macedonia, gave me his take.
I think the Trump administration is making a strategic change in the policy of the US. It expresses deep vested interests of the US elite. That is, in a period of economic crisis and geopolitical upheavals, the US wants to use its superpower status to achieve as much benefits as it can. So it will pressurize everybody else to succumb to the US interests. Now, the main adversary is China. China is a big guy and it is outside the G7. The other big guy is Russia. It is also outside the G7, although Trump today said that Russia might come into the G7. This is a policy choice. Till now the US wanted to corner Russia and give some sweeteners to China. Now there is a change of policy with the Trump administration. They court Russia and they want to marginalize China. The rest in the G7 are mostly Western powers, and they are so weak towards the US that essentially they can't do much, although they will probably pay the price for the US trade wars.
Amidst the pre-summit mudslinging, the White House announced that Mr. Trump would be leaving the G7 meetings a day earlier, departing on Saturday morning to prepare for his historic discussions next week with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Considering the central role the US has historically played at the G7, it is unusual to see such public displays of not only difference but also hostility toward allies and vice versa. No doubt to the horror of many a free market establishmentarian in Washington, the world seems to be coming round to the idea that perhaps we're entering a post-US order, epitomized not only by Mr. Trump's recent tariffs, but also his ditching of multilateral agreements, including the Paris Climate Accord, left, right and centre. It could be said that the mood was captured perfectly again by President Macron, who remarked in Canada on Thursday that the United States is no longer the sole economic superpower. I asked Mr. Mavroudeas if the growing rift between Washington and its allies is truly indicative of an emerging post-American order.
There is such a possibility although France and Macron especially is just a joker. It is not, Macron especially is not significant. He tries either to court Germany or before Trump, but he has no significant leverage. But for the US, there is a growing danger that it might lose its superpower status. And for this reason, the Trump administration is moving so as to avoid this development.
Whether or not the network of alliances known as the West can overcome their differences, including on Trump's tariffs, we'll find out over the next few days as the G7 summit progresses. But one sentiment that might be ringing in the ears of Mr. Macron and Mr. Trudeau was that put forward by EU chief Jean-Claude Juncker a few weeks ago, when he said that with friends like Donald Trump's America, who needs enemies? Matthew Ayton, Radio Sputnik.